Alright, my friends, despite many videos where I was very quiet, I think I have learned how to use my microphone, so enjoy that. I realize that I have a condenser mic and I need to put it fucking close to my face so that you can hear what I'm saying. So, today we're going to talk about Linux is Linux, and that's going to be the clickbait title, with a little quotation marks around it, because I want to make the argument against Linux being Linux, where what people usually say is like, if you're in a fucking Gen 2 or Arch, you can root from like, a Mint USB, or you can bootstrap Gen 2 from anything. Because it has the same command set for the most part, unless you're on like Debian or something for some reason. They have to do things differently. But for the most part, and this is why they say like macOS is Unix, is because it has the same command set for the most part, and it ships some core utils, like it's got bash or whatever. I can't remember I think it uses bash. And so there's this idea that Linux is Linux. You can get any distribution to work like any other distribution, and it should just work, right? Now, that would make sense if Linux wasn't super customizable, both by the end user and the developer, because there's nothing stopping me from making, like, putting the Linux kernel in something like Android. you know, that's the fucking first example I came up with off the top of my head. I was like, yeah, it's fucking Linux, but like, to what end? It's obviously not the same as other distributions. Android obviously doesn't work the same. It has to have its own fucking kernel patches and all this other shit, like modules and all this. So, and let's not be that fucking pedantic about it, right? Let's not say that the most random fucking shit is Linux, but when you're obviously talking about distributions, right? So then I can get into embedded distributions where you can run a very limited set that's very hand tailored for an embedded device, but then we're still being pedantic like Android. So let's go with something very simple. How about OpenSUSE? How is that different from something like Gentoo, right? Well, Gentoo will run just about any kernel you throw at it, and it's very easy to modify and compile a kernel. OpenSUSE likes to do it differently. So OpenSUSE has a very customized kernel, and it doesn't have every module loaded. So you may notice something like your Xbox controller doesn't work over Bluetooth because Xbox DRV can't do anything with the module, stuff like that. So if you decide, oh well, I can just build another kernel for OpenSUSE, that's not so hard. Yeah, it is. And you will notice that there was only like one dead project that fucking managed a like port of like Licorice or something, or like Zen kernel or whatever over to OpenSUSE, and it's a fucking nightmare. I'm gonna tell you that right now. Just getting it to compile and for it to work is a nightmare. God forbid you have to like put it on a working system. So is that Linux, where it runs a very specialized kernel. Now it does all the same shit, it's not like OpenSUSE is this like fucking game changer that does everything unique or has like some proprietary bullshit on top of it. It does have excellent features like Yast, which I ended up using because KDE's fucking printer configuration doesn't work because of the way OpenSUSE deals with that. So if you install KDE, you'll end up having to use Yast to manage cups if you don't want to use the fucking terminal for everything, which is cool. I also realized too that my printer drivers don't work on OpenSUSE despite them having an RPM available. I still have to use BR laser, and that gets me into another fucking thing. Oh my god, this is gonna turn into a rant about OpenSUSE. So, they have the same problem I have with Debian and Ubuntu. Basically, just Debian is everything is on a fucking PPA, and I don't want everything to be on a PPA because anytime I load up another fucking repository in Zipper, it slows it the fuck down. Then it's really fucking annoying. So, yeah, just put all your shit in a single repository. If not, just make it a fucking Flatpak. I'm getting sick and tired of this shit. you know? On Gentoo, everything's in the fucking repository. It's wonderful. I love it. And you're supposed to compile everything from source anyway, so I have no trouble compiling things from source. That's kind of the whole point of the distribution, arguably. I mean, obviously, being able to compile things is a main feature, but I use binhost for a lot of things because I'm not fucking messing around with Mate's use flags or anything. I don't give a shit, you know. But yeah, so we have this problem where people think that Linux is Linux because they can run fucking sudo and it works on just about everything you throw at it except Gentoo, which you're using doas for because you decided to for whatever reason, you know. And that always kind of irks me a bit that people, we have this mentality that Linux is super customizable, but it's all the same. And that's just not fucking true. If I wanted to, I can make a very hardened Linux distribution, which a lot of people have, you know. And guess what? It's not going to have printer support. You're not going to be able to install cups on it. Is Linux Linux then? You know, it can't fucking print, you know. So like, I don't know. You know, it's this idea that because it's all the same command set or because it mostly does the same thing because you can install XFC on most distributions and it will mostly work, that everything is the same, and that's just not fucking true because the deeper you get into it, the more different things become and the less things you're able to control, you know, unless you like decide to fucking strip everything out of it like Josh does on distro hacking where he like you know takes a distribution that's obviously intended for one thing and turns it into something completely different because yeah you can do that with open source software, you can fuck around with it and make it do whatever you want, but you got to put in a lot of fucking elbow grease for that, and sometimes it'll actually be almost impossible on your own, you know, especially when you start getting into heavily modified kernels, which is kind of my main example here. But let's go with something even easier. You know, let's not just pick on OpenSUSE. Let's do Kali Linux versus Debian, because Kali Linux is basically just pre-configured Debian, but it has a lot of pen testing shit pre-installed. So yeah, you can configure Debian like that, but you're also gonna do a lot of fuckery with it in order to get it to do that. So like, can you consider it a similar distribution? Maybe, but I wouldn't say it's, you know, even suitable as a daily driver because of all the shit it does and how many fucking security holes it has. So, especially when you start getting to like security packages, like as you harden things, things will get different and different things will be supported and different things won't work. As you deal with the kernel, different modules will be loaded, different file systems will be supported. You may need packages to support other file systems, which is cool, right? You know, like I like that about Linux. I like that it's very customizable, but it can also be turned into something that isn't quote Linux, you know? You can turn it into whatever you want. You can put it on a TiVo box. Now is it going to be anything like, you know, like most Linux distributions? No. It's not. It's not going to work nearly the same. And I just thought we might want to change that mentality that Linux really isn't Linux. And the reason why, especially I ended up distro hopping so much, is because distros do everything in such a unique way that problems become unique to that distribution. And no matter what you do to it, you can't fix it because it's too encoded in there. It is too baked into the code, you know? That stripping it out would basically mean you're making another distribution on top of it, you know? Or you are stripping out core components, you know? And that is one reason that a lot of people may end up distro hopping is because they're like, oh yeah, I don't like how Arch does this and that, and I don't like how it breaks so often. I need different testers that do different. Oh yeah, that's another thing too. Is you ever hear about people that do like package count as a metric of bloat? So a void install with 500 packages is basically the equivalent of an OpenSUSE install with 2,000 packages because OpenSUSE actually splits all of their packages into like 100 different packages per project. Uh, I guess it's more manageable that way, but again, that's them doing something completely different from other distributions, you know? How you manage packages, how you test packages, how you package the packages, how you distribute the packages. These can all be extremely different, and that's not something you can really change on your distribution. So like, yeah, maybe DNF will work mostly the same as apt, but the Fedora repositories aren't even close to what the Debian repositories are or the Ubuntu repositories, and Flatpak doesn't work the same as Snap. Snap supports terminal applications, Flatpak doesn't, you know? Do you want to install Snap on your distribution? Do you want Ubuntu? you know, you have all these options. They are there, but at some point you are at some point you're fighting with what the distribution is, and you should probably start looking for another one because at its core, kind of, yes, quote, Linux is Linux. That's the headline grabby title, but each distribution can do things extremely differently, and I've found over the years that I need distributions to do things a specific way, which is why I was attracted to things like Void and Gentoo, is because I love Void's maintainers. I love how they do things. I love how they package things. I love how they test packages. I like how they're mostly compatible with like whatever kernel you throw at it. You can easily port things. I like their I like their community. I like everything about it, really. For a binary distribution, it's very good. I like their init system, even though it's kind of limited. It is also very simple, and it's easy to use for somebody that doesn't really give a shit. Writing services for that is a fucking piece of cake. But and then I look at something like Arch, and I'm like, well, why do I hate Arch? Because Linux is Linux, right? And it's like, well, it's because I hate everything about Arch. I hate the maintainers. I hate how they test packages. I hate how they're rolling release, but they don't do it quite as well as something like OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. But then I go to OpenSUSE and I'm like, I need a new kernel, and because you don't have my fucking modules, so you know, or I don't like your implementation of KDE's fucking printer stuff because it doesn't work. So like, yeah, quote, Linux is Linux, but you are going to find that different distributions are insanely different with what you'll get out of them. And that's something that a lot of people don't really realize, especially as you get to that point where you are customizing distros a lot more. As an end user, this isn't so much of a selling point. You can't just tell somebody that Mint's going to be the same as Arch. It doesn't work that way. you know like, yeah, maybe you can turn Mint into a rolling release distribution, but you probably can't, and you would also need much better maintainers to do it. you know so there is a lot more built on top of a distribution than just the distribution. It is not just software. There are people involved, and you need those people in order to make things work the way you want them to. Because without those people, what the fuck are you gonna do? You're messing with a huge fucking code base that you don't fucking know what you're doing. It's like the only problem I had with Thorium was that it's one dude trying to mess with Chromium, which is already unmanageable. Like, what the fuck do you do with that? You can't do shit about it. Maybe you could do some minor optimizations, but that's about it. And Linux is a lot more modular than the Chromium code base, so it is a lot easier to do those things with a smaller team, but you still need that team. Doing things on your own is not usually a good idea, especially if your idea is I can turn any distribution into another distribution. I did come up with another point just there, which was, yeah, if I don't want to use a rolling release distribution, guess what? I'm not going to be able to turn that into a rolling release distribution unless I want to fucking compile everything, you know? So that's really about all I had to say. This idea that Linux is Linux makes sense to an extent, but only on the surface. It doesn't make sense the deeper you go into it, and the deeper you get into Linux, you will find that there are variations. There are major core differences between these distributions because Linux is just the kernel. Yeah, if all you're doing is fucking typing commands in Bash, yeah, Linux is Linux. You're fucking good. But the distribution on top of it, which is not Linux, is going to be very different. And that's really all I wanted to say. Thanks.